Welcome to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. You can engineer human and you can engineer leaders. Here on Your Corporate Shrink, join Elizabeth Frisch, a corporate fixer with a heart of gold, a wicked sense of humor, and a passion to solve pervasive business problems permanently. We will dive into the real issues and opportunities facing companies and government agencies today. Let's get started helping you engineer leaders.
Welcome to You Can't Engineer Human. I'm your host, Elizabeth Frisch, where we tackle all of the things that keep us stopped in our organizations and cause us problems. I am super excited today because I have Cameron Harold for you all, the mastermind behind hundreds of companies' growth. He has a great background, and just to be aware, he's considered the guru. And oh, by the way, at age 21, he had 14 employees. By age 35, he built his first $100 million company. In fact, two of them. And of course, all of us who know 1-800-GOT-JUNK, yep, that was Cameron's also. So we want to welcome him today, and we're going to get to do a best of. Cameron's an amazing best-selling author, great books out there. And so we're going to start first, Cameron, your latest book, 2018, Vivid Vision. And as someone who grew up in corporate America, you know, I always struggled with how they did goals and visioning, right? And you have a brilliant approach now in the Vivid Vision book about how to do that. So what is the difference between your version of visioning and kind of traditional corporate America?
Yeah, traditional corporate America has really been starving for this one concept forever, pretty much. Basically what's happened in corporate America and even in entrepreneurial companies up till now was you'd get all of your leadership team basically into a room, and you would ask your leadership team to talk about the words that most inspired them or the future, and they would put a bunch of words up on a whiteboard. And then everyone would vote on their favorite words, and you'd end up with 7 or 8 leftover words, and those would be mashed up into one sentence. And then that was kind of your vision statement, right? Go team. And walked out of those meetings and went, this is terrible. It's hokey. It doesn't align us. It doesn't show us where we're going. And even when Simon Sinek came up with the brilliant book, Start With Why, and he talked about having your core purpose. Now, it's great to understand your core purpose, but it doesn't describe your company. It doesn't describe your shareholders. It doesn't describe your employees. So what I decided to do was to codify an idea where you lean out into the future 3 years out, and you describe your company in its finished state 3 years from today. So let's say you lean out 3 years to December 31st, and you describe your company as if you're walking around your business. You describe marketing. You put 3 or 4 bullet points down around operations and 3 or 4 around IT. And you describe finance and engineering and sales. You write 3 or 4 bullet points around what the customers are saying about you and what the employees are saying about you and what the market is responding like and what the media is covering you. You describe it as if you're standing in the middle of your company 3 years from now, talking about your culture and the meeting rhythms and the leadership, almost as if it's already come true. And then you write down all of those points, and you get a professional writer to have you polish it and finish it off. But it becomes a 4 or 5 page written document describing your company 3 years in the future, and then you and the team can figure out how to make every sentence come true. So that finished document becomes what we call the Vivid Vision. And the Vivid Vision is either for the entire company or for each independent business area. It describes the future state, and then you can put the plans in place to make it come true.
And who's involved in that visioning? Is it just the CEO? Is it each head of the division if it's bigger? How do you recommend doing that?
Yeah, if we start at the top of the organization, it's really the CEO is responsible for crafting the vision of the organization and where the company will be, what it will look and feel like 3 years out. And then the team figures out how to make it come true. Very much like a homeowner who's building a home. It's up to the homeowner to decide what home they want to build. You don't get the electricians and carpenters and the framers and the plumbers to design a home. That would be ludicrous. But they're the ones to actually make the plans come true. Now, they also don't come up with the plans. Right? The homeowner has the vision, the contractor creates the blueprints or the plans to make the vision come true, and the workers figure out how to make the blueprints come true so the vivid vision or the vision for the home becomes the reality. The same in the business world. The leader, the CEO or the leader of a business area crafts the vision for their company or their business area. their team comes up with a plan to make it come true, and the employees execute on the vision, and leadership helps remove obstacles and give them skill development and coaching along the way.
And what I find is really brilliant about the vivid vision approach is you attract the people who want to support the building of that vision, and you can repel those who shouldn't be on board. Sometimes it was funny. I remember about 4 years ago, I had almost 100% turnover of staff. But it wasn't a bad thing, because what it turned out was I had done the kind of traditional planning, right? And I didn't, and it didn't work out at all. And then when I finally said, no, this is where we're going, this is what it looks like, then suddenly it was like, oh, I want to do that. And other people would be like, nope, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go somewhere else. That's
where it becomes so easy to attract A players, to attract great employees, is when they're clear on what the vision of the company looks and feels like. They're either excited and want to make it come true, or they know they don't want to be a part of it and they'd rather work somewhere else. But I'd rather have that figured out day one or prior to day one than to wait 2 years in to realize that it's just not the right fit because they want to build something else.
Yep.
And that's where the vision statement or the core purpose statement isn't enough, right? It's important. So I think of almost like every business is like building a jigsaw puzzle, right? You have the picture on the front of the jigsaw puzzle box is the vivid vision for the company. And then the four corners are where you go to next. And those are your core purpose, your core values, your BHAG, and the plan to make the vision come true, right? And then you have the sides of the jigsaw puzzle with the people systems, strategic thinking systems, the meeting rhythms, and the financial systems.
And I think that's an incredibly powerful statement, because I don't know anyone who's built a company, including myself, that hasn't shed people when the vision gets crystallized.
Right.
Because really up until then, you don't know who's just there for a job, who's really behind this or that. And so for all the listeners on, once you get that vivid vision, that 4 to 5 pages down, who would you go to next? Who do you involve next in the process? Because there's a whole rollout, right?
Yeah, and now remember that any great CEO, if they've got a solid team of people, they already know what their employees are excited about and where their passions are and what they're building. They've already probably synthesized some of those ideas. The key is just not to make it a big group writing effort. So once the entrepreneur writes the very first rough draft of their vivid vision, they get a professional copywriter to take it and make it pop off the page and add some design elements to it. You're then ready to roll it out to your team. And the idea is pull your team together and have everyone read it together. And while they're reading it, either virtually over the phone or over Zoom or in person, you want to kind of watch their reactions and listen to their reactions and ask them to circle all of the sections that they're most excited about. And you're just looking for the ones that are vibrating, that are excited about that future, and you're looking for the ones that are clearly not in favor of it. After you get the employees and leadership team excited about the vivid vision, it's time to roll it out externally, and you share it with your customers, your potential customers, your suppliers. You send copies to your banker and your accountant and your lawyers. Everybody gets to read what the future looks like, and they all start conspiring to help you make it come true.
And I think that's really, really brilliant, because one of the things I've noticed is people stop. They have this internal visioning, they do it with the leadership. They keep it in-house, kind of under wraps, and don't share it. And you talk about shedding employees. Is there a phenomena also where you might lose certain clients but gain others?
Yeah, at the end of the day, again, when everyone's really excited, think back to, let's say, 11 or 12 years ago when Apple was rolling out the iPhone. And coincidentally, I was sitting in Austin. I was at a Mexican restaurant on the other side of a bridge from downtown, kind of as you were going up a hill on the right side, this little lime green or light green Mexican restaurant. I don't remember what it was called. And the guy beside me was sitting, and he had the iPhone in his hands, and he was typing away on it. I was hearing the click, click, click. And I was like, is that the iPhone? And he said, yeah. And I'm like, can I look at it? And he showed me. I'm like, how do you type? Because remember, it came out without a keyboard, and we all thought he was crazy for not having a keyboard on a phone. Like, how could you, every phone, the Trios, the Palms, the Blackberries, they all had keyboards.
Yep.
And then the first time we touched it, we were like, whoa, I have to have this. So Steve Jobs and Apple were crazy enough to roll out something that the customers really weren't asking for. We wanted a keyboard, and they knew that they were right. And all of a sudden, they got all of these early adopters and the innovators and the early majority to start joining and buying and raving about their product. And then all of a sudden, it became cool for everybody else. And now it's kind of like, if you have a BlackBerry, you're kind of the geeky, the weird one. Like, BlackBerries are like Disco. Disco used to be cool too.
Yeah.
So they were willing to lose a customer because they knew that the vision was right.
And so you bring up an important thing. They knew the vision was right. I can't tell you how many times I go in and everybody's looking at the data going, well, the customer doesn't want this, or I did this survey and the customer says do that. And then you see the business literally go bankrupt doing what the customer says they want, right?
The best example is what Henry Ford always said, right? If I did what the customer wanted, I would have tried to create a faster horse.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, as a CEO and working with companies like that, and there's certain types of companies that tend to be very data driven, right? And so they're really uncomfortable about, something like Apple did. What do you say to those leaders? How do you get them to shift that space to say, no, this is what we're going to do, no matter what this latest survey said?
Yeah, I guess you are using a combination of data and your gut, right? A combination of the facts and feelings. And you're really understanding your market, you're understanding the customers, you're understanding, the data points of what you're building. I mean, it's crazy to build something because you're so excited about it and no one else is. Mm-hmm. So I think that, there's a combination in there for sure.
Okay, cool. What about once you get it in place, right? And how long does a vivid vision last? How often should you do it again? Where does that fall in the, traditional planning process for a company?
Sure. Yeah. What I really suggest is that you lock and load for 3 years and that you drive towards that vivid vision. Every quarter you're rereading it. Every quarter you're rolling it out to customers and suppliers. And you really keep focusing quarter by quarter on making it come true, one sentence at a time, almost like building your dream home. You build the foundations, then you put up the walls, then you put in the electrical and the plumbing. Everyone really always wants to put in the Wolf stove and the beautiful cabinets, but you have to wait until the foundation is done and strong before you throw in the beautiful stuff. So you design what your company will look like and you keep working towards it. The only time you would change it inside of that 3-year period is if there's a massive shift in your market, like a global financial crisis where your entire business is turned upside down. But otherwise, you just continue to drive towards that same vivid vision.
Got it. Now, I get to work with a lot of COOs, and even sometimes when they have a vivid vision, they'll come back and say, we thought we'd reverse engineered. It kind of fell apart on the implementation part of it. Right. Any favorite tech capabilities, like things you must have to make sure that, you actually do reverse engineer and do use that vivid vision and do implementation over a 3-year period versus get distracted by that bright shining object?
Yeah. So, Thomas Edison said that vision without execution is hallucination.
Yeah. I love that quote.
It's kind of like, I'm going to manifest. Well, get the hell out of your bed and start doing, because you can only manifest for so long before you have to put some effort behind your manifestation. So you need to have the right people, the right system. So what I do is I look at every business like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, remember when you have the jigsaw puzzle and you open it up and you on the cover, on the front of the box of the jigsaw puzzle, you have a picture or the vivid vision essentially of what you're building, right? And then you look for the corners. You get all the puzzle pieces out and you look for the corners of the jigsaw puzzle first. And the 4 corners for me of a business are your planning system, so the plan to make the vivid vision come true, and then your core values, your core purpose, and your BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. Right? So those are essentially the foundation of your house to build that vision on the front of the box. And then the 4 sides of your jigsaw puzzle are all the people systems, the strategic thinking systems, the meeting rhythms, and the financial systems. And I like building the business in that order. The first thing I start with is the vivid vision. Then I make sure that we're really strong on the core values, the core purpose, and the BHAG. Once we have those, the 4th corner, the plan to make the vivid vision come true. And we only do 1-year plans at a time. Again, building it like you're building the house, right? So it's foundation and then walls and plumbing, etc. And then you work on all the employee systems. So everything from recruiting, interviewing, selection, onboarding, training, leadership development, culture, exit interviews, keeping people in the right seats, and then all the strategic thinking systems like planning and looking at the data and the measurement systems and strategy meetings. And then all your systems related to meetings to make sure that you keep people focused on the right things and supporting them. So those are your daily meetings, strategy meetings, financial meetings, one-on-ones, etc., daily huddles. And then lastly are all the financial systems and just making sure that you have the financial checkpoints and systems in place to make the business grow.
And you led perfectly into my next segue, which is obviously I'm talking to the person who really looked at the whole phenomena of meetings suck and most of us hate to sit in them, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I loved about the book you published is you just called out the elephant pooping on the board table, right? That we all as corporations and companies spend an excessive amount of times in meetings for very little outcome. Your book came out in 2016 and there were some waves and improvements in certain parts, but I'm still constantly amazed, and it almost seems to be a generational shift as we're moving between the generations of how much time. And for our listeners, Cameron uses some very specific language in meetings, ad hoc meetings, daily huddles, adrenaline meetings, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm always amazed that I can go all the way up to C-suite level of an organization, and they're still only running that little bit of meetings. And it almost seems like they're trying to run the company out of meetings. And how do you help a company pull back from that? Because it's so destructive to just, be constantly grabbing people and constantly be ad hoc. Like in my company, I don't have instant messaging for a reason, because It pulls people into too many of these things like constantly, and they never get to the weekly strategy meeting or the goal setting or that kind of thing. How do you take a company away from the brink? Because I'd still say most companies, too much time in those little meetings.
Great question. Yeah. So what I do is I really try to get people focused on putting the right meeting rhythms in place in their calendar. So thinking about what are the core meetings that we always need to be happening, that need to happen every year, like the annual planning meeting, quarterly planning meeting, financial planning meeting, strategy meetings, your weekly leadership team meeting, your financial review meeting, your one-on-one meetings, your daily huddles. Those all go into your calendar, and then all the busy work gets built in around it. It's kind of like putting your rocks in the calendar first. I know that sounds like a lot of meetings, but when you actually see the structure of them, they become very powerful, and you remove a lot of the normal email and Slack chatter that goes back and forth. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I do is I train people on not only how to run meetings, but how to show up and participate and attend meetings, and how to actually opt out of meetings that they've been invited to that they just don't need to be at. I also teach people how to only invite the key people that need to be at the meeting, and not just over invite people, which we tend to do because we're worried about hurting their feelings that we didn't invite them. Well, the reality is their feelings are hurt that they were invited. They don't want to be there in the first place. So that was actually why I wrote my book called Meetings Suck, was for every employee at every company to read it, to learn not just how to run them, but also how to show up and attend them.
And I love, you had a section I remember on agendas. And where do you think companies are failing on agendas that they could really have a major turnaround?
So it's really thinking about what are we covering, in what order are we covering it, and how many minutes are we spending on each agenda item. So it's really tightening up the agenda to make sure that you think about how many minutes will you spend on each agenda item, and then booking the meeting based on the amount of minutes that you need. That's the first part. Secondly is making sure that you finish every meeting 5 minutes early, so that everybody has time to walk down the hall, talk to their assistant, get a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom, to start the next phone call and meeting exactly on time. So you build that 5-minute buffer in. And then thirdly, it's telling people for each agenda item, what communication style are we using item by item? Is it info share, which is either information being shared either top down, bottom up, or lateral, so there's no discussion, no debate, it's one person talking. Or it's creative discussion where we're brainstorming, blue sky, throwing ideas around. Or the last one is consensus decision, where at the end of that discussion or that item, we will make a decision as a group. And when we walk out of the room, we've all agreed on consensus. And it's important to tell people that, because otherwise what you end up happening is, one person at an info share item where they're just sharing information that turns into a discussion and a debate. Whereas if they were told right at the beginning, hey, this is just you sharing with the group, there won't be any discussion or debate. Everyone's clear on why we're doing it. And I think those are the kind of the missing core parts of agendas.
And I want to bring some emphasis to 2 points. One, you mentioned having meetings end 5 minutes early.
Mm-hmm.
I know personally from when I instituted that practice, the trust I gained from not just my clients, but my employees of knowing that I wasn't going to keep them past or make them late. It's almost a psychological care thing. You allowed them to take care of yourself and they're more likely to show up to the next meeting. So I love that you stressed that in Meeting Suck. And then I think that behaviorally, and I'm cross-trained in psychology, and one of the things I think you did so brilliantly with the human brain was the minute you tell people how to behave in the agenda, then they will usually fulfill the predicted behavior, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you leave it open, they don't. And so it was just, I loved when you said, you put that thing in there because basically you're telling them the behavior you want and then they stick to it. And so you eliminate so much wasted time on those things. So just loved that part of your meeting agenda on what was the point of the discussion and everyone, it's information sharing, creative discussion, consensus decision making, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of what really came to me as well, is that people just want some box to stay within. And the reason meetings suck isn't because meetings are bad. It's just because people don't know how to run them. They don't know how to participate in them. When you give people the basics, it's kind of like baseball, right? If you send a kid off to Little League Baseball and they don't know how to hold a bat, they don't know how to throw a ball, and they don't know how to, hold their glove or catch a ball. If they don't know the just basics, they'll come home from their first day at Little League and go, baseball sucks. Well, yeah, of course it sucks because you suck at it. But if you give them the basics, they'll come home and they actually had a good time at it. And that was what I started to uncover, was everyone was complaining about meetings and they didn't know how to run them. The same thing with interviews. It's astounding to me how many managers and leaders have to do interviews and they've never had any training whatsoever on how to do interviewing. That's one of the core skills for leaders to be trained in.
We had a podcast actually that everybody should listen to if you're interested on that. We did have a person who's sensational about the interview process, and she said the same thing you just said. She said, you all are not attracting and retaining because you all never mastered interviewing, recruiting, the whole process start to finish, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I love the new systems. I'm seeing more systems that actually do give constraints and boundaries simply. And one of the last things I remember out of the Meeting Suck book was you talked about like healthy conflict and banning devices and some of those things. How do you feel employees and employers can get empowered to engage in healthy conflict? Because to be frank, one of the biggest complaints I hear is, I can't say anything right now because everybody's offended to start with, So what do you think are the best ways to really have employees learn how to do that? Because healthy conflict is healthy, right?
Yes,
we want conflict. If we all agree, we never grow.
Yeah, Pat Lencioni talked about it in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, that if you don't actually have, if you have fear of conflict, you actually have real big problems occurring in the workplace. So I think you're right. Conflict is great. So I call it race to the conflict, and I teach people a very simple system to deal with conflict that starts with 4 phrases. So the phrases are, when you, I feel, I need, how do you feel? So an example would be, let's say it's someone showing up late for a meeting all the time. It's, hey, Bob, I need to talk to you about something that's really been bugging me. Bob goes, sure, what's up? Yesterday, when you came to our finance meeting and you showed up 7 minutes early and walked in saying, sorry, I'm late, it really kind of pissed me off. And it pissed me off because it felt really disrespectful. It felt like you were thinking that your time is more valuable than everybody else's. And you just seemed kind of cavalier about it. So it's kind of frustrating to me. And I was really bothered by it. What I need from you in the future is for you to finish all of your phone calls and meetings 5 minutes early, so it gives you time to show up for your next meeting on time. It gives you time to walk down the hall. So that's what I need you to do, is every phone call, every meeting, finish 5 minutes before the scheduled ending time, and then you can start showing up on time for all your meetings, which gives people a lot of respect. I also need you to remember that every time you say, sorry, I'm late, what that really means is F you, I'm disrespectful, I'm selfish, and I think my time is more valuable than yours. How do you feel about that? And Bob has nowhere to go on that except say, wow, you're right. Because it's only about that specific issue. I've raised my feelings and I'm giving him time to talk. And I didn't talk about something 3 months ago. I didn't say everybody's always upset about this. I owned it myself. And I didn't talk about it's all the time. I just said yesterday at this specific meeting, this is what happened. And I think when you deal with conflict that way, specific versus general, very recent, you've raced to the conflict, you're doing it face to face or over video. You're not making an example of the person, you're just talking about the specific action. And you use that simple model, when you, I feel, I need, how do you feel? They really actually accept conflict quite well, and they grow from it.
Yes. And conversely, and I think you talked about this in your book too, is if you can have healthy conflict, then you also get to encourage participation, because most people don't want to participate in a situation where it's toxic. And how do you, and I'm sure you have a few things when you're dealing in the room with really powerful, domineering people versus people who, I always call them like my introverts who think very deeply before they speak. And then I have some of my extroverts who like to exclaim things before they think, right? How do you get employees in the mode to keep that under control so that no one person can take a meeting over?
Well, you have a moderator. So in the meeting, you have someone whose job is to make sure we stay on each agenda item. And the other job is to make sure that if we get off topic, they say, hey, that's a great topic. Let's take it offline. We'll put it up on the parking lot for later, and the key people who need to be involved in that can stay or can talk about it, at a separate meeting. So they have to moderate the group. I also like getting all of the employees to write down their ideas. If it's a creative discussion idea or a big discussion or topic we're having decisions around, they write down their ideas, one idea per Post-it note, and then I get each person to read out their ideas one by one, starting with the newest and most junior employee first and finishing with the most senior person in the room last. And that gets the quieter, analytical, amiable people to read their things out. And they don't get steamrolled by the, more dominant, expressive, high Ds. And
I love what you said about the moderator, because again, and y'all got to listen to Karaman's every sentence really carefully, that moderator, again, is a psychological safety tool. It creates someone in a role that everyone expects to do that role, to hold that role and keep that meeting going. And it doesn't feel personal. Their job is to moderate or facilitate, or however you put that verbiage. So love, love, love that you did that. And one of the things that has come up more and more is we have all these quote unquote virtual meeting platforms now. So we may not be meeting in a room. What do you think are the biggest landmines now of that shift from all of us getting in front so we can see if we're using our devices and call them out if people are checking email, versus now all of a sudden we're either all on a phone or all on a video and you can't really tell? Like, how has that changed the meeting structure?
Well, a couple things. One is I try to get all the employees, when they're coming to a meeting, if they're coming to a physical meeting, to check their phone at the door. So they actually drop their phone into a bowl or put it on a shelf right at the door. And if they're too busy to be able to stay fully present at the meeting, that means they have more important things to work on, which is great. Don't come to the meeting, work on those more important things. So that way you start booking meetings for tighter time periods, you stay on track, and everyone stays completely focused. With virtual meetings, when you're over the phone or over email, over Zoom, etc., you just try to just set a precedent and a standard. I mean, you can hear people clicking away on their keyboards. In person, we'll call people out and say, if you're caught checking your email, you have to buy everyone in the meeting lunch. But I think it's just a protocol now that, because a lot of this is happening virtually, more of just a general conversation and general understanding that we all just agree to stay present. And we agree that we've all got lots on our plates. If we're too busy, that's cool. Let's just move on to those other items. Let's go back and do our other work.
And I like what you implied in there too. There's something of a code of conduct and a permission to call each other out. I remember getting called into an organization of board of directors that was running this organization, and they were getting nothing done. And they were doing virtual meetings because everybody was all over the world, right? And I could literally hear them at the grocery store, the kids, and like they were not showing up in the best space, and literally just giving that thing saying the code of conduct of meetings as a board member of this company is X. And if you can't, then you shouldn't be sitting in the meeting, right? Yep. And those are little subtle things. And I love that you bring those up, as they're just little tweaks that have a huge impact.
Yeah, they really do. And I think that's kind of, again, I think that's probably why I go back to, we just have to train everyone on the meeting rhythms, or train it. Like, when business people make business so extraordinarily difficult when it should be quite easy.
Mm-hmm.
You just
Yeah.
overcomplicate it.
I think one of the biggest compliments I ever got from an employee was, she said, our organization is so drama-free.
Mm.
And it was funny because to me, I was like, I hate drama, right? I love goals and targets and action. And I was like, well, tell me about drama, right? And she told me all these stories. I was like, yeah, you're right. In other organizations, because they don't get the meeting rhythms, because they don't do vivid vision, because they don't deal with empowering their employees to have healthy conflict, then you do get a lot of drama, not because people are bad people or wrong or toxic. They just don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I'm going to pick way back to a book that came out in 2011 on the double-double.
Sure.
So when you talk about vivid vision, right, if you do it well, things start happening fast. So how do you prepare for fast growth, right? All of a sudden you put the vivid vision out, everybody's like, woohoo, and then you're off to the races. What do you do with that as a leader of like, oh, wow, I just did something so successfully that we're now going really fast and I'm not sure I'm prepared?
I think it's almost less than preparing for it and it's more planning for it. I guess it's the same thing. So what most companies do is they try to forecast where they're going to be in the future, and then they work towards that forecast. What I try to do is different. I lean out into the future and I decide where I'm going to be. Then I reverse engineer everything I need to do to make that happen, and then we execute against that plan. So I'll give a pretty large example of this for a second. But when Elon Musk took over Tesla from the original owners, he didn't decide to make the original Roadster faster or better. He decided to create a completely different vehicle, the Model S. And he designed a vehicle that would fit him. He's 6'5". He designed a vehicle that was fast and sleek, just like his former car, the McLaren F1 that he used to have. And a lot of people don't know this, but the original Model S has a 7-seat option. In the trunk, you can actually get a 2-seat jump seat. So the car seats 7 people, 2 in the front, 3 in the back, and then 2 kids in the very back. And the reason he did that was he has 5 children. He's got a set of twins and a set of triplets. So the whole idea was if he was going to build a car, it had to be exactly like him, just like, would fit him, would fit his family. It had to be super fast and super sleek. And then it had to be priced so it could sell. And then he just decided to say, who wants to help me build that? It's the same as building a company for fast growth. Decide where you want to be, reverse engineer that, and then put the rules and the people in place to make it happen.
And when you
might involve raising money.
Yeah.
Might involve on equity. But every plan can be executed on, right? The same as landing the Falcon X rocket. The reason those rockets can land is when he was a kid living in South Africa, he made model rockets with his brother Kimball, and they would watch the rockets land. And he's always wanted to be able to build big rockets and have them land. That's the whole reason.
I know, and it's amazing how those kind of things can come together. I remember I've always been a consultancy firm in the past, and then we're switching actually to training and more SaaS, but I never said anything to anyone. And that was funny. The minute I wrote not a 4 to 5 page vision, but a couple pages, and just was sharing with a friend who happened to also own a PE firm, he was like, I'll fund that. Oh, I didn't even think about getting money to do it. I was just thought it was a good idea, right?
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, but if you take this, you can do this. And next thing I knew, it was like, oh, fast growth. Yep, I see that. And if I'm willing to give up this percentage, I get that, and I get there 5 years sooner than I put in my plan, right?
Yep.
Now, flip the equation on that. What do you do? How do you grow when it's slow?
How do you grow when it's slow? A few things. One is when the competition's drowning, stick a hose in their mouth. So if you're slow, everybody else is as well. And business is a full contact sport, so you go after them. Try to go after their competitors, go after their employees, predatory pricing, search and destroy on their marketing. You just find ways to take out a couple competitors. That's one. Really look to get efficient on your marketing and advertising. When everyone else is cutting back, you actually look to spend advertising and marketing dollars because everyone else is going to be cutting. That's the last area you cut. Look for real inefficiencies in your business and cut the dead weight. So cut the people that aren't working, cut the systems that aren't working, and put everyone focused on sales and marketing. You don't need a new system. You don't need to perfect anything. It's all about how much time can we be spending on landing new customers, on getting more revenue from our current customers? Get a supplier to buy into your business and invest in your business, or get a couple of customers to buy into your business. You can lock them up. Just anything around that kind of full contact support idea. And then I always have a mantra of people by day, paper by night, that during the day, it's all about engaging with our customers, engaging with potential customers. And at night, we deal with the paperwork and the admin side of the business.
Yeah. And I love that point on sales and marketing, because, you come into an organization and every time it goes down, I remember that's the first thing everything cut. And my degree's in chemical engineering, so I come from a systems and an optimization standpoint. And I remember the first time I did a business consulting project and they were in a downturn, and so they're going to cut sales and marketing. And the engineer was like, well, that doesn't make sense, because then you're going to just get worse, right? And they were like, well, what do you mean? And of course, as an engineer, I crunched the data and I was like, well, X number of sales produces this much revenue. If you cut sales and marketing by half, you're going to end up worse off in this downturn than you thought. And they were like, oh, we never thought about it that way. And for me, like I said, as a process engineer, they always teach you that all systems are interrelated and each trigger produces a metric and an outcome and dependency. And so it was funny, because to me, it was automatic as an engineer of like, no, of course don't do that in a downturn. But that wasn't in the business world. Like in the engineering world, it's like, you don't eliminate the product that's producing the biggest yield in the production process, right? But yeah, in corporate America and in business, people are like, no, that's not a profit center. So it's interesting that still languishes in the minds and thoughts of many leaders at this day and age.
Yeah, exactly. I also look for just waste in our assets and like look for stuff to sell. It's funny, right now, my 17-year-old is selling everything around the house that we don't use right now. He just made $1,000 this month for selling old stuff that's sitting around the house.
Oh my gosh, he and my 16-year-old should get together. That's what he does.
It's all depreciating assets, right? It's stuff that's but if you look around your business at assets that are just sitting there that, one man's junk is another man's treasure. If you can look for ways to actually unload some of that stuff, somebody wants it. And then that cash can be deployed into marketing. Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting. I love that my kids and your kids, their entrepreneurial nature is almost inherent, because they, like mine, were born knowing tech. They know tech better than me. They know how to use YouTube better than I do. Like all those different places where they sell, setting up sites on Etsy. There's something called DeviantArt I didn't know. My daughter is 13 and already bartering and trading art for profit at age 13. You think like, wow, it's great that we now are kind of Gen Z's becoming this entrepreneurial spirit again.
Totally.
Go ahead.
No, I just said totally.
Yeah. So I wanted to wrap with the last thing, because you are the co-author of The Miracle Morning for Entrepreneurs. Work-life balance, we all know, our listeners who are running companies, that's the thing that can get really out of whack. What would you say, like either a warning or a goal for people who are doing this kind of leadership to make sure that their cup isn't running dry, they're also filling that cup?
Yeah, so I guess a few things. One is, I don't believe that work-life balance is actually possible. What I believe is that you've got a few different competing priorities in your life, and you need to choose 2 priorities per quarter that you really obsess about, and you let the others kind of go on autopilot, almost like getting a rocket up into orbit. So if I think of I call it the 5 F's, and I've got friends, family, fitness, faith, and finance. So friends, family, fitness, faith would be like your spirituality or taking care of yourself. And then finance is anything you do to make money, right? Business or so what I try to do is pick 2 areas per quarter that I really, really push on. So for me this quarter, it's family and fitness. And those are my 2 big priorities this quarter. And the next quarter, I'll pick 2 more. And it's not like I let them completely slide and I go to hell with it, but I really want to push on that. The second thing that I do is I have a series of morning habits, morning things that I try to do as part of a morning routine. And if I don't get them all done, I give myself a bit of a break. I don't beat myself up because I didn't get all 15 things done on my morning habit list. And I think that's something to consider as well. And even when we were writing the book, The Miracle Morning for Entrepreneurs, in my intro, I said, at the end of the day, sometimes my morning routine is kind of waking up and hugging the pillow and hitting snooze. And Hal's really good at it, at getting up at 4 every morning and doing his savers. I'm kind of average at it, but I have my routine. I have my morning habits. And as long as I get 5 done per morning, I feel like it was a good start to the day. So I don't beat myself up. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for progress all the time.
And I love that last comment, because I think that's where we fall down as leaders, is beating ourselves up and thinking that brain pathway is actually the best one to use, when in fact, every study's proven that's actually some of the worst pathway to grow in your brain synapses, right? The people who don't do that actually are the ones who are most successful. So thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. And as our listeners know, I always close our podcast with one big question. So Cameron, if you, out of all the things we talked about today, and our listeners could walk away from this podcast and take one action, how do you think they should do that, so that they do this podcast and then get a big win because they took the time to spend with us this afternoon?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's that to remember that none of this actually really matters. This is just what we do to make money. And if we can just relax and have some fun and maybe not take ourselves so seriously, we might actually just have a better life. And I think some of us just take work far, far, far too seriously, when none of us are going to get out of this alive.
Yes.
We're all just walking each other home. This is just what we do to make money. And I think we have to remember that.
Yeah, I was laughing, for a culture that's so afraid of death. It's like, that's the one thing since the dawn of time that we're all guaranteed, is that at some point we leave this physical space. Yet it's the one thing we deny to want to do. And yes, so I love that. Thank you so much, Cameron, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Remember, if you have questions or comments, we will do an Unfiltered Friday for your questions after Cameron's podcast goes live. So send your questions unfiltered to podcast@thrivalcompany.com, and we will get your questions answered. Thank you, Cameron, for joining us today.
You're welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You are so welcome.
Thank you for listening to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. You can engineer human, and you can engineer leaders, with your host, Elizabeth Frisch. Find Elizabeth and her team at yourcorporateshrink.com.